This story began with a girl who was the illegitimate child of the Balasite family. She had a very unhappy life. Her half-sister was taking out all her anger and pain on the girl. She didn't think they were on the same level. This girl was her father's puppet that he used in all sorts of ways for the sake of the family. Plus, her own fiancé had a hand in her death. The girl kept thinking that God thought her life was miserable too. And when she opened her eyes again one day, it was back to a day when she was 20 years old. It was a new and second life for the girl. This time she decided that she would destroy all those who had brought her to this point. The girl decided that she would live only for revenge. And for starters, after pretending to be madly in love, the girl married a longtime enemy of the Balasite family. His name was Marquis Winterfeld. He's from the north. And if the girl is the daughter of his enemy, surely the Marquis could not sincerely fall in love with her. She thought everything had worked out just as she'd planned. But something went wrong. The great perennial war between the kingdom and the demons by the efforts of one hero ended with the victory of the kingdom. People welcomed the savior who ended this war, and his name was Li Ji-ho. There are nicer descriptions for him, such as he is a warrior from another world, a dragon slayer. He is also the fiancé of the Duchy of Balasit's jilted wife, Lady Nadia Balasit. Nadia had no choice because their marriage was arranged before Li Ji-ho became a world hero. That's how the whole tragedy of this story began. Nadia Balazit. She is the daughter of a concubine from the Balazit family, a puppet. The girl did not dream that her own father would recognize her. He did not understand why they needed this useless trash, because it only spoiled the dignity of their family. And always Nadia was compared to her younger sister, who had been spoiled since childhood. And the servants also treated her with disdain. But suddenly the girl had a chance to gain her father's respect. One day he came to the girl and said that he had some business for her. The man said that marrying him will help them a lot in their family. And this particular marriage is with Li Ji-ho. Back then, Li Ji-ho was a mercenary who had been summoned from another world for the sake of protecting the kingdom. The speed of his development was so fast that it even scared many people. Duke Balasit was sure that if he tied him to his daughter, it would surely play into his hands, and so he entered into a sham marriage with Nadia, and they both became pawns of the Duke of Balasit. Nadia was determined at that moment that she would succeed in life, and no one would dare to ignore her wishes. Even though they were forced to marry, the girl still had hope that one day they could live as a normal husband and wife. But that was all until she fell into the trap. She went to jail. Nadia tried to prove that it was all a misunderstanding and nothing was her fault. But her sister only laughed and said that apparently the girl still didn't realize the predicament she was in. She apologized and said that Lord Li Ji-ho would never come to her again. Nadia didn't know what she was talking about. The sister said that things had changed dramatically since she first married him, for he had now become the most important man in this country, and his wife could not be a girl like Nadia. All this was said by Nadia's half-sister, a girl named Karain Balazit. Karain asked her sister, so what was the misunderstanding? Apparently she had mistakenly thought she was the one who had imprisoned her in this dungeon. Nadia began to protest. She was saying that this matter could not be. The girl was very angry at this situation. She said that her sister and father must have had something to do with it. At first Nadia thought it was because of her feud with her half-sister. Karain wondered if her sister really thought so. It is, after all, a major scandal that has spread throughout high society. There was only one way to make it look like this marriage never happened. Father ordered that Nadia be given alcohol at the upcoming banquet. Normally that girl is very cautious. That's why you have to spike the drugs to make her intoxicated. After that they hired a man, and when it starts they will call people right away. The more witnesses the better. People, when they saw all this, began to say that it was just the height of indecency. At the banquet itself, it is immediately obvious that she is the daughter of a concubine. Sister moved closer to Nadia and asked, did she know that it was a great idea that Lord Li Ji-ho himself had suggested? At that moment, the girl thought so, and realized that after that incident, her husband never visited her. Nadia thought it was because he was disappointed in her, but in fact, it was he who planned the whole thing. And even marriage to such a girl, the daughter of a concubine, he must have considered it discrimination against him. Nadia told her sister that if he had simply suggested a divorce, she wouldn't have objected. But at that moment, the girl thought that she was, after all, a mere derelict, and it was rather foolish to hope for anything at all. Karain said he couldn't do that because his reputation would suffer. After all, he is a war hero. Nadia was quiet for a moment and said, That means she came because she felt sorry for him. And now he's become a hero and… But at that moment her sister interrupted her and told her that she could say what she wanted, because this was her last chance. It's all she has left. But Nadia did not know what she was talking about. Then the sister asked who would accept someone who had been abandoned by her husband because of an affair with another man. Besides, she is a bastard child and will not be able to marry anyone but a simple laborer. Karain asked, in that case, if it wouldn't be better to die with honor. At this moment, the sister launched the men who were with the rope into the dungeon and said that she would help her in this difficult matter, but only once. The men went into her cell and began to tie a rope around her neck. The sister continued to talk. She said that her father wanted to let her stay, but she decided to commit suicide because of the shame she felt. And poor hero Lord Ji-ho suddenly lost his wife, but Nadia tried to resist. She screamed that she didn't want all this. Karain wouldn't stop talking. She said it was their way of defending their honor and the honor of the entire Balasite family, and only Nadia's name will be tarnished by her shameless misbehavior for which she was punished. But the girl didn't want to die. She just wanted to go on living. Karain said she would be remembered as the one who knew shame. Nadia couldn't breathe anymore. The girl couldn't believe her life would end like this. All her worthless life she had done as her father told her, obeyed. As a child, Nadia always watched her stepmother's reaction. She couldn't even breathe without her permission. The stepsister took away all the good things from the girl and didn't even regret it. Karain, when Nadia was almost dead, came close to her and said goodbye to her, telling her that she would miss her. And eventually Nadia died, having lived only 23 years. The girl thought that this was how it would end. But when she opened her eyes, she was back to a day when she was 20 years old. The first thing the girl did while sitting on the bed was to feel that there was no rope around her neck. She could breathe in peace. Nadia didn't understand how she had survived. In her dark mind, she could definitely feel death enveloping her body, but she eventually woke up perfectly healthy in her room. Besides, things don't look the same as they did 3 years ago. Nadia just couldn't believe she was back in the past. The girl thought that even if it was true, she had another chance, a chance for her to get her revenge. A selfish fiancé, a sister who laughed while Nadia was killed, and a father who used her and then simply got rid of her. Like some unnecessary thing just picked up and thrown away. And if you were given a second chance, what would you choose? Live for love or live a long life in good health? Nadia already knew what she wanted, so she wouldn't have had any doubts if someone had asked her. Then suddenly a maid came into Nadia's room and she asked if she was awake already. If she was, she should have rung the bell immediately. The maid said she was the reason she couldn't clean her room, and at that point Nadia really decided to choose revenge. The maid immediately approached the girl and asked what she was doing. If she touched the mirror with her hands, she would leave stains on it. Nadia had been worried all along that it might just be a dream, but as time went on, she realized that she had indeed somehow gone back in time. Because this is the maid who has now begun wiping the mirror, the responsibility for the cleanliness of Nadia's room before Karain killed the girl herself 3 years ago. Oh, and besides, on the day of the banquet when she was captured, the maid had planted Nadia's alcohol on Karain's orders. The girl drank it and immediately passed out. It was too suspicious to call it a coincidence, when she didn't realize it was all a trap, and that she had been tricked by the servant. But it was different now, and there was no way Nadia would fall for it again. Suddenly the maid turned to the girl and asked her what that look on her face was. Was she trying to tell her something? But Nadia replied that it was nothing, and afterward thanked the maid for always cleaning there. The maid was shocked. She couldn't even say anything after that, and Nadia, going to the door, said she would be out for a while. As the girl walked out the door, she was met by the head maid and addressed her mistress. The girl said that His Majesty the King had come to see the Duke, and she needed to prepare to meet His Majesty. Nadia was very surprised when she heard that the king had come to see her father, but replied that it was just in time and she would be ready soon. After a while, Nadia packed up and went out to see her father, the Duke of Balasit. The girl bowed and asked if he had summoned her, but the Duke answered rudely that she was very late. Nadia gave him a scornful look and replied that she was just getting ready in a hurry, but the Duke looked at his daughter as if she were some kind of a lowlife. In the past, she had been afraid of that look and had meekly obeyed, trembling with fear. After a short silence, Balasite said that he would tell her everything on the way, so let her listen carefully. It's about the triumphal ceremony. Therefore, the king and Kamshi along with Karain must take care of the tea. Also the issue of Nadia awarding Lord Ji-ho with a laurel wreath will come up. She need only agree to it, Nadia replied. Well, she realized that the king had come because of the ceremony to celebrate the triumph during Kalai's expedition. Holding such ceremonies is a long tradition. At it, a girl of married age puts a laurel wreath on the hero for whose sake the ceremony is organized. In other words, it's like a declaration of love. The problem is that at this ceremony, one of the people being honored is the one being honored. He's a northerner, which means he's the South's worst enemy. Nadia thought that was probably why her father wanted to shift the focus to something else. By allowing Nadia to give the wreath to Li Ji-ho, they want to tie him to the girl through marriage. Even if she refuses, her father won't listen, but she needs to free herself from her father and Li Ji-ho. After a while, they came to the right room and entered it. Karain was already serving the king. When they entered, the Duke immediately greeted His Majesty the King. When he saw him, he said he was just waiting for him. Let him sit down soon. After they sat down, the king asked, "Probably he already knows why he came to see him?" But the Duke replied, "How could he possibly know that? He has no mind-reading ability." But the king said not to play dumb. He already knows everything. The Kalai Expeditionary Force demanded a triumphal ceremony. The Duke took a cup of tea and replied that they deserved it, and let the king do as they ask. But the man got angry and said that it's not the problem at all. It's who's standing in that unit. One of the leaders with the most merit is their worst enemy from the north, the Marquis of Winterfell, and he will get quite a bit of attention at this ceremony. Then the northerners will think too much of themselves. The king didn't understand how he could speak so calmly about such things. The Duke answered him not to worry about it. He wouldn't shift the focus of the ceremony to something else, and he had a plan to tie the Northman's hands. The king was surprised and told him to tell him soon. Nadia, when she heard all this, thought that he had not hesitated to take seriously what her father had said. It was already no surprise to her that the northerners were not happy. But then suddenly the Duke said they would bind them in marriage. Let the king use his authority and order him to marry. The Duke said let his bride be the daughter of a nobleman from the south. Then they could prevent him from uniting with someone from the north and becoming even stronger. Hearing those words, Nadia remembered all the details of her past that had faded from memory over time. After she and Li Ji-ho became married, as a reward for her success in the expedition, the Marquis of Winterfell also got married. And of course his bride was a girl from the family who was introduced to the king by the Earl of Balasit. It was rumored that she constantly cried because of the Duke's cruelty, and finally ran away. In fact, Nadia felt very sorry for the girl who had become only a puppet in her father's plans. But then suddenly, the girl had a thought. If she were to be that girl now, it would mean she could avoid the marriage with Li Ji-ho, as well as the revenge she craved. The girl thought she couldn't be reckless, and it was too early to tell. The king replied that it was a good idea, but who would willingly give him his daughter? The Duke thought for a moment, and replied that apparently His Majesty did not believe in the loyalty of his servants. For the sake of the country, people would certainly give up their daughter. At that moment Nadia thought that this was it. Now it was time to act. So the girl went up to the king and addressed His Majesty, asking for forgiveness. She said she had something to tell him. Nadia said that if he needed to, she could go to the enemy camp to the north. Something she could do. At this point, Karain became indignant and asked her sister how dare she interfere in the conversation. The Duke, hearing this, became very angry, but the girl went on. She said she was of the Balassite family, who had served His Highness all her life. Therefore, she is the most trustworthy of all. In fact, Nadia felt a little sorry even for her father, but she has to do it. So the girl asked the king to let her marry the enemy for the sake of His Highness and the welfare of their country. But Nadia, in her father's hands and in his dirty games, she's not going to participate either. The Duke suddenly spoke up and asked his daughter if she was really going to marry the Marquis of Winterfell. Apparently she doesn't know what she's talking about. The king said that it must be that his daughter didn't know what his relationship with Winterfell was. The king at this point sat and thought, and afterwards said it was a commendable decision. But as her father had said, weren't their families sworn enemies? Forcing someone else would be a lot easier than marrying a girl off to him. The Marquis of Winterfell might not take her as his wife. At that moment, the king said that she had a great idea, hadn't she? Nadia replied that yes, she did. She then said that she would present a laurel wreath to the Marquis of Winterfell at this ceremony. The Duke was unhappy with her decision. He said she was very stupid. Did she really think he would just accept a wreath from her? But Nadia replied that yes, because so far no one had yet refused the laurel wreath. The Duke, after calming down a bit, replied that such things are decided in advance. They had already planned for the girl to give the wreath to Li Ji-ho. Nadia was silent for a moment. Then, in a quiet voice, she said that he would never refuse her. Father asked why she was so sure of that. Nadia said she had overheard their conversation while she was making tea, and asked if it wasn't the Marquis himself who had requested this ceremony. The awarding of the wreath is the point of the whole ceremony. But if someone refuses the wreath, the situation changes to the poor girl being denied her recognition. Of course, the hero is the one people love, but the love between the two is far more interesting and exciting. People will quickly forget his merits. Nadia asked, would he dare to destroy with his own hands all that he had longed for? Everything must happen just so he would accept the wreath, and then… But suddenly the girl was interrupted by her father. He said that His Majesty could influence him to refuse, then he would have no choice. Nadia confirmed her father's words. Thereupon the girl went to His Majesty and told him to insist on the marriage, under the pretext of a plea from an official's daughter. Then he will become a magnanimous ruler who only wants to make the love of a noble lady a reality. The king hesitated and said it was a rather devious plot, but it was very convincing. But still, he is a little worried. How can he send the Duke's daughter to the enemy camp? So he turned to the Duke and said that he would first ask him what he thought about it in the end. After a little silence, the Duke smiled and said that he had no idea his daughter had such a wonderful plan. At this ceremony, his daughter would present a wreath to the Marquis of Winterfell. After the king left and they were alone, Karain told her sister that she had gone completely insane. She knew the girl was stupid, but she didn't think she was that stupid. Had she done all this knowing who the Marquis really was? When Nadia remained silent, her sister continued to ask. So she was really going to volunteer to go north, even knowing that the north was their enemy? She then turned to her father and told him to answer something already. But the Duke waved Karain away and told her to stop because it was none of her business. Then he turned to Nadia and told her to explain herself. What was she thinking when she suggested that? He had made it clear exactly what her role was. How dare she disobey his orders? Even though Nadia had gotten permission from His Majesty, if she couldn't convince her father, she would lose this battle again. Therefore the girl must make the right move. Nadia answered her father that she had no desire to marry a man whose origin was unknown, though half of Balasite blood flowed in her. The Duke then asked if she had done it just because of that, because of such unnecessary pride, and now they must give all honor to the Marquis of Winterfell. Nadia tried to reassure herself, telling herself not to be afraid. She didn't want to live as a pawn anymore, after all. Then the girl replied to her father, "What honor we are talking about? Let him experience it just for a moment." Nadia asked, "Wouldn't it be more important to prevent what could happen because of this?" That's what he was trying to take people's interest away from the ceremony. Father pondered her words. Afterward, he asked how she knew about it. Nadia was glad, because that question meant she had hit the bullseye. The reason why Father is reacting to the glory of the Northmen in such a way is because the imperial family is now, without exaggeration, a puppet of the Duchy of Balasite. In other words, this is exactly what the Duke has been seeking for so long. He has the king himself in his hands, but at the same time he has the most vulnerable position he can have. There have been many instances of provincial heads plotting a rebellion in violent times like this. That's why her father is so worried. Rebellion threatens his position. Nadia thought she should dig deeper into what he was afraid of. So she said that even if not at this ceremony, they would still secretly gather. Whoever gets all the glory, they should definitely observe them. Therefore, this ceremony is the best place for such a thing. They will give water to the animal that thirsts for water, and put a collar on it that will restrain it. If Nadia marries him, they will be able to learn more quickly about the changes in the north. And thanks to her sacrifice, the Duke can quietly strengthen his position. Nadia told her father to let her do it for their family. The Duke thought for a moment. He thought that it really did make some sense. This expedition didn't go as he had expected, and because of the success of the Northmen, they have to have this ceremony. But if Nadia goes to the north as Winterfell's consort, they will be able to find out their movements faster. So it's a good chance to put a spy in his entourage. After thinking for a bit, the Duke replied that so be it, they would do as his daughter wanted. Karain, who was standing beside her father, was shocked. She immediately shouted at her father and asked if he would really send her sister to the north. But what about Lord Li Ju-hee? He was going to give Nadia to him, but her father told her to keep quiet because he could safely find him a new bride as well. Afterward, the Duke turns to Nadia and asks her what she really wants. He knows full well that she is not doing this for him or the family, so he wants the girl to tell him what she wants for her sacrifice. Until then, Nadia has been able to deceive him, so all she has to do is to answer this question correctly. After thinking well, the girl answered that she wants freedom. One day, when he defeats his enemy, Winterfell, and that's when she asks that the Duke let her live as a rich widow. Unmarried girls are condemned by society, but widows and divorcees are not, and even if she doesn't remarry, Nadia no longer wants to carry their family's name. She doesn't want to be tied to anyone. She just wants a normal life. She asked her father if he could promise her that. After that, Nadia left his office and walking down the hallway thought they had a successful deal. From the very first day she went back in time, she immediately succeeded in avoiding marriage with Li Ji-ho. But then suddenly, passing by the window, the girl noticed some sort of squabble. One of the maids shouted that it wasn't true. She hadn't done anything, but the head maid shouted at her and told her to shut up. She then asked her how she dared to touch Madame's things at all. The maid kept crying and said that she hadn't stolen anything. Nadia now realized that Karain's puppet had been kicked out as well. It turns out that the girl was given a chance to deal with everything on her own. Nadia is still, of course, a long way from revenge, and first she needs to detail her future plans. And while the girl was plotting how to destroy the Duchy of Balasite, it was already time for the ceremony. On this day, a guard approached the Marquis and told him that all preparations for the ceremony were complete, and asked that he lead the troop, because it's already time for them to depart. Flower petals were flying everywhere in honor of congratulating the squad on their victory. Watching the soldiers marching in marching formation, people cheered them. Everything was happening just like in Nadia's past life. From the clothes and jewelry she was now wearing, to the seats everyone was sitting in. Everything was exactly as it had been before. At this point, Nadia reflected that if she hadn't interfered, things would have gone on as they had in her previous life, and the ending would have been the same. Then suddenly her sister turned to her and asked her, well really, what would she do if her pendant got a crack? Karain lent it to her, as it was her father's order, and once the ceremony was over, she told the girl to put it back. Nadia was shocked about her sister saying she borrowed her own mother's jewelry, but she didn't have the energy to respond. She had always tried to please before, but now the girl didn't care about that, because she is going to escape from there at any cost. But then the Duke suddenly spoke up and told the girls to stop. The troop would be arriving soon, so let Nadia get ready. He said you should try to screw it up and hand the wreath to the Duke of Winterfell with dignity. But there was only one exception to how the ceremony from a past life differed from what was happening at the time. The main character that Nadia will present the wreath to is Marquis Glen Winterfell. When Nadia looked in his direction, she noticed Li Ji-ho standing behind him. The one who was supposed to be the hero of this ceremony was her ex-husband. Despite the fact that they had not married for love, the girl felt that there was a connection between them. Remembering all those moments that Karain had told her about in her past life, the girl's heart began to beat very fast, and she felt resentful. At that moment the king was making his speech. He was telling Glenn that he would give him glory for his deeds. All the knights who were there said they were honored. Afterward, the king said that he had heard that Winterfell's merit was particularly high in this expedition, and hearing about it gave him a warm feeling. Glenn, who was still bowed before the king, replied that the rumors were a bit exaggerated. The king laughed and told him to put all this modesty aside, because when he looks at him, he is reminded of the past ruler of Winterfell. He was a rather distinguished knight too. The king said his loyalty was commendable, and if his bedridden father learned of his exploits, he would definitely be happy for his son. The most sore subject for the Marquis of Winterfell related to his father, but the king brought it up anyway. His Highness said he should reward the Winterfell family for their loyalty, but Glenn replied that it was enough for them that he knew about it. The man smiled and said that young people in their time were very serious. And then, by the king's decree, the official ceremony began. The king addressed the people and said that on this day they had gathered in this place to congratulate the heroes on their victory in Kalia's expedition. Immediately afterward, the greeting began. The family and Duke of Balasit was the very first to meet the Marquis of Glen. He went up to him and congratulated him on his successful operation, calling him a young gentleman. But Glen interrupted him and said that he had already inherited the title, and so he was now a marquis, and if his memory failed him, he had better leave his post and rest. The Duke was angry, but he didn't show it. He said, "How can it be? He made a mistake," and then added that, though Glen had become a marquis at such a young age, there was still much he lacked. Glen said, "So that's how it is," and asked, "What could be so difficult for a man in his prime?" The Duke ignored his question and said he thought the guy did resemble the former marquis with his fervor, but then, as if remembering, he added that he was talking about the man who had had the accident. He paused for a moment and said he was sorry. This the king said that it was time to hand over the gifts prepared for the heroes, and called Nadia over. At that moment, the girl thought that this was her moment. As the girl approached Glen, he realized why the Duke had happily agreed to perform the ceremony. He decided to change the essence of the ceremony. Glen assumed that the owner of that wreath must then be Li Ji-ho, because anyone knows that Nadia's father supports him. Glen thought that this ceremony was originally just for himself, so he should just quietly let it pass and not take it personally. The expedition had actually taken longer than he thought, and he had quite a lot of things piling up at home. Glen thought that it would be very nice if they were paid handsomely as a reward. But at that moment, he noticed that a girl had approached him. That surprised him very much. Glen didn't understand why Balasite's daughter was standing right in front of him. Maybe the girl was worried about the large number of people. Then he leaned over to her and whispered in her ear that it seems she made a mistake due to excitement, and Li Ji-ho is the guy with black hair standing behind him. Glen told her to walk slowly that way, but then everyone would turn a blind eye to her little mistake due to excitement. But Nadia wasn't going anywhere. She just stood there looking at him. The man then asked why she was not going. Nadia replied that she wasn't wrong. Glen asked what she was talking about. Afterward, the girl said that the Marquis of Winterfell had been on her mind for a long time, so she asked that he accept her laurel wreath. Nadia continued to talk. She said that she fell in love with him at first sight as soon as she saw him. She felt that he was someone who could take care of her for the rest of her life. But Glen asked Lady Balasite in a whisper. Perhaps she didn't know what it meant when an adult girl hands a wreath to a man? Nadia thought at this moment that he was much ruder than he was said to be, but she replied that she knew all about it, and she was now confessing her love to him. She then held out a wreath to him. After a short silence, the king spoke. He turned to the Marquis and said that the beautiful lady was waiting, so why didn't he answer anything? Glen turned to His Majesty and said that he didn't deserve the wreath, so he couldn't accept it. He had no idea what was going on, but they certainly didn't like it. He can't fall into that trap. Nadia had expected this reaction, that he would not accept the wreath so easily. At that moment she thought that it would be very profitable for him to marry her too. So the girl came closer to him and tugged at his sleeve. She thought there was nothing to be done. She had to act. Nadia turned to him and told him that if he was worried that she was definitely a scissors, he could just accept the wreath and not worry about her. With these actions, the girl first wanted to arouse the pity of the people. Suddenly, someone in the crowd shouted, "Why doesn't the Marquis accept this wreath?" Others supported and said that he was making her shameful and waiting. Is it because of his disagreement with the Duke that he is taking his anger out on this young lady? Others shouted for the Marquis to accept Lady Balasite's sincere love. At that moment, Glen thought they wanted to ruin the ceremony with his own hands. After that, he snatched the wreath from the girl and said that this was a rather long conversation, so it would be better to continue it later. Glen turned around and started to walk away. At that moment, the girl thought that she had succeeded, and just like that, she was able to change her future, which could turn out to be very sad. After this celebration, it was already evening when the Duke and his daughters were on their way to the carriage. Her father told Nydia that she had done well today. Duke said it was worth it to see Glen's confused face. He had no choice but to accept her invitation. Nadia smiled at her father and told him that he might not thank him, and thought to herself that it was in her favor after all. But then suddenly, when the Duke was about to get into the carriage, Lord Ji-ho ran up to them and said that he urgently needed to talk to him. Balasite asked the guy what's wrong. Should his body be so tired after traveling so far? and why he won't go rest. Ji-ho said he urgently needed to talk to him. He then said that he had heard that Lady Nadia was supposed to present the wreath to him at this ceremony, and asked what had happened, why she had not done so. Nadia wondered. Had his father told him about it beforehand? The Duke thought for a moment, then answered the boy. It just so happened. The matter was urgent, so he couldn't put Ji-ho on notice. He apologized to Ji-ho afterwards. The Duke said he would soon find a better match for him, so he might not be upset. The Lord got angry and said he didn't come to him to look for a new bride. He wants to know why they didn't change their plans at the last minute. The Duke replied that there was a reason, and the street was not the place to talk about it. He then told Ji-ho to go into the carriage. Tomorrow merged and asked him if he thought it was too much before he joined the army. So did the Duke, but the man immediately interrupted him and asked him what he wanted now. The ceremony had already taken place, and there was no turning back. Ji-ho sighed indignantly, and the Duke put a hand on his shoulder and said that he recognized it as his mistake for not warning him anyway. In order for the Lord to believe, he'll make it up to him and compensate him for it. After that, he'll ask if Ji-ho knows what he's talking about. The Lord remained silent, and afterward, after thinking a moment, replied, "Which is fine, so be it." The Duke then told his daughters to get on the wagon as soon as possible, and when Nadia was about to go in, she looked at Ji-ho. The girl didn't understand why he had such an expression on his face, but then she thought that she didn't need to worry about it, because now it didn't bother her at all, because he was the one who betrayed her first, so she's not going to treat him special. Sometime later in Winterfell Mansion, Glenn was sitting in his office, and his assistant came to see him. The aide said he had heard in the marketplace all but talking about the ceremony that had taken place. The lady, who was not often seen, professed her love for the Marquis. The guy said that Glenn would have to respond to this somehow, or he'd just be taken and forcibly married to a girl. Glenn sighed and said it was too late. Then he handed him the letter and told the boy to read it. The aide took the envelope and asked, "Is this really a letter from the royal family itself?" After that he began to read. When he finished, it was powder. He told the Marquis that he wanted to olive it, but they tell him to make a marriage. Glenn said that was correct, and if he continued to refuse, they would consider it disobeying the king's order. His assistant got angry and said this is over the top. Why are they doing this to him? He didn't understand what else they wanted. Glenn, on the other hand, even agreed to the expedition. Plus, the Marquis's army and lands pay taxes steadily. But even with all these points, they still doubt him. Glenn said that it must be the Duke of Balasite who has taken to saying all sorts of nasty things about him, because he wants to expose the Marquis for sedition. The northern territory where Winterfell is located was not always part of the kingdom. It was subjugated 100 years ago. The North and South, who differed in culture as well as many other things, could not easily get along with each other. The Northern Army defended the border in the north from monsters, then provided security and fertility to the South. But Southerners, despite this, considered Northerners savage and fearsome. So the previous Marquis and Marquis of Winterfell have had an accident because of someone's plot. And of course it's the Duke of Balasite who comes under suspicion the most. And there's the Duke's daughter presenting the Marquis of Winterfell with a laurel wreath. Glenn tells the aide that there are two reasons why they want this marriage to happen after all. First, to prevent the Northmen from forming an alliance through marriage. And second, and more likely, to send a spy into the enemy camp. The aide said it's a great way to get an early heads up on what's possible. So it makes sense why they're so insistent. The aide also almost forgot to mention Lord Li Ji-ho. According to the people at the ceremony, Lady Nadia was originally supposed to give the wreath to him. They say he was terribly surprised when she didn't. Glenn asked again, asking if he was sure. The aide replied that that was right. He had heard that Lady Nadia and Lord Li Ji-ho had secretly promised to unite hearts and lives. Apparently the plan that involved Lord Ji-ho was changed in a hurry, and he himself was not told about it. At this moment, Glenn thought that he knew that the wreath was originally meant for Ji-ho and not him. Then the Marquis stood up and said that he would have to do as His Majesty wanted, or else they would have a great reason to attack the Northmen. The deputy was shocked. He said, "But she's his daughter." Glenn told him not to worry. She's just a beautiful duke's daughter. What can she do in a foreign land without a single ally? Glenn even doubts that the girl will even endure the cold attitude of the servants for at least a week, and he thought it couldn't be otherwise. She'd want to come home and he'd have nothing to do with it. So the man doesn't worry too much. And just like that, the Winterfell and Balasite families were united. The wedding took place on Winterfell soil, and the engagement in the capital. After they quickly sorted out these minor things at Belicite Mansion, a banquet was held to celebrate the arrival of the new family. There were nobles there who mocked Nadia for marrying Winterfell, knowing her family's attitude towards it, as well as her father, who was enjoying everything that was going on. But now was not the time for Nadia to pay attention to them, because she has to play the role of a noblewoman in love who only has eyes for one man. When they were at this banquet, Nadia called Glenn over to dance, and at that moment the girl sensed something, namely that the Marquis of Winterfell had become even more wary of the Belicite family. So for starters, the girl needs to show him that she is not a danger. But then suddenly, while dancing, Glenn noticed the girl's concentrated face and asked what it was she was thinking. Nadia was even kind of confused at first, and then replied that she was thinking about how handsome he was, and the girl called him Glenn. But the Marquis resented that, and he said she calls him by his first name, though he and she are not close at all, so he asked that the girl call him Marquis Winterfell. Nadia replied that it was fine, if that's what he wanted, then she would call him that. After that she smiled. After dancing some more, Glenn let go of her hand and said it was a smile that even annoyed him. Afterward, the man turned to her and said he even wondered whether she would be able to smile as brightly in the north. He couldn't wait to check it out already. After that, Glenn turned around and walked away, and Nadia was left alone. Suddenly, people were heard swimming over. Oh my God, look at that, poor thing. And why did she only fall in love with Severyanin out of shame and can't even raise her head? But in fact, Nadia with her head down only smiled. She thought they should leave quickly, because she couldn't squeeze a smile out of herself anymore. After a while, Nadia decided to get some fresh air, so she went out on the terrace. The girl thought that it was very difficult after all. Her whole body even cramps from forcing herself to smile all day long. And since people are all around her, the smile never leaves her face. But suddenly the girl's thoughts were interrupted by a voice. It called out to Lady Nadia. When she turned around, she saw Lord Ji-ho. He said that here he had found her. When the girl turned around and asked what was wrong, Nadia didn't understand. What had he come to her for? The Lord came closer to her and said that he had come because he wanted to ask her something. Nadia was surprised and asked what she had nothing more to tell him. Ji-ho, in a frustrated voice, asked, "Does the girl really hate marriage with him that much?" Nadia was very surprised and interjected that he was saying such a thing. The boy asked, "Is it better for her to endure humiliation and slanted glances, and to go to the very center of the enemy camp, than to be with him?" Nadia turned to him and said she didn't understand what he was talking about, because it had not been clearly decided from the beginning that they would get married. Ji-ho said the Duke already told him everything. Okay, we switched at the girl's request. Nadia said that she has nothing more to say to him then. The man was surprised and asked, "Is he not worthy to hear the truth?" Then he suggested, "Maybe it's because he's an outsider? Because his origins are unknown?" Nadia didn't realize that this was even happening to him, since he was the one who had originally betrayed her first. Then she said that he wasn't happy about their marriage either. Ji-ho asked when he had said that, but she said she was not stupid and understood. It bothered him that he was being discriminated against because of his background. The girl asked if that was why he wanted to marry a girl from a noble family, but she was just a throwaway. If he was offered to marry Karain, he wouldn't even doubt it for a second. When the girl finished saying all that, Ji-ho didn't answer anything. He just stood there and remained silent. But it didn't even surprise her that he wouldn't be able to answer anything. Then she realized that Karain's words were true after all. What else could she have expected? Then approaching the door, Nadia said that they were not suited for each other, so let each go his own way without disturbing the other. After that, the girl went to the gazebo. When she sat down, she realized that she was very tired, but she was glad that at least in this place she could be alone. Suddenly Nadia heard footsteps. She realized that someone was coming towards her, but she didn't know who it was. And after a while, Karaini came up to her and asked if she could talk to her favorite sis. Nadia immediately asked her, "So why did she come?" She was distressed that she could not be alone even for a moment. Karain then asked, "So why does she follow a man around and dishonor their family? Does she really think the girl will just tolerate it?" Karain said that as a true daughter of the family, it was her duty to warn someone like Nadia. The girl asked, "Was she really jealous that her father only cares for her?" Karain asked, "Maybe the girl wanted his attention." That's why she went to such a desperate step. Oh, poor thing. But no matter how hard she tries, she's just a pawn in his game. Nadia said she was basically correct. And afterwards she said that her sister must not have thought that they were not so different from each other. Karain asked what she meant then. Her sister said that she didn't succeed in marrying Lord Ji-ho, so it was her turn. Karain got angry and asked what she was talking about. It's very different from her. After all, she is the daughter of a duchess. Nadia asked her, does she really still believe her father? A daughter is just a means to an end for him. Her sister asked how she even dared to rank her with a scum like her. Is Nadia really laughing at her right now? But then suddenly the girl noticed her mom's necklace on her. Karen told the girl she'd tell her dad, but when I saw no reaction from my sister, I asked her if she was ignoring her words on purpose. But then I noticed she was looking at the jewelry. Karain started to take off the necklace and asked if this was the jewelry her mother had gotten from her father, right? He gave it to her because he thought the girl would give birth to a son. And in the end, Nadia showed up and her sister said she just didn't deserve it. Then handed her the obelier and told her that if she wanted to take it, she had to get on her knees and beg for it. She should repeat after Karain and say she was sorry for acting so recklessly towards her sister. She would never annoy her again. The sister said she'd forgive her if she begged, otherwise she'd just get rid of the necklace. Karain said that she had a lot of these trinkets and could throw one away and nothing would happen. Then she asked if it was a good suggestion, but Nadia didn't answer anything. She just stood looking at her sister. Then the girl asked, didn't she want him? Then there's nothing to be done. But then suddenly Nadia shouted and told her to wait, then asked she would really give it to him if the girl kneeled. Karain, at this moment, thought that there was nothing else left for her to do, so she replied that of course she would give it to her. Let her bend her knees quickly. At this point, the girl thought that the quiet girl was suddenly starting to show herself and annoy her. Now she would teach her a lesson, but she wouldn't get the necklace back anyway. Karina said that she was very generous if the girl asked her nicely. But at that moment her sister started running straight at her. Karain was already in the water in a second. The girl asked, had she lost her mind now? What the hell is she even doing? The sister asked, does she really think she's going to get away with this act? But Nadia only asked, what happens if she doesn't? The girl said she wouldn't have returned the necklace, no matter how much she begged. Nadia already had her mother's jewelry in her hands. In her previous life, the girl had also had a similar experience. She had obeyed Karain unconditionally, but as a result, she had never been able to get her necklace back. Nadia told her sister that she had thought about it a lot as a child. Where did her sister get so much hatred for her? She wondered if she would recognize her sister as her sister, if Nadia did as she said, but eventually realized that she hated Nadia for no good reason. So now the girl had given her sister a real reason to hate her. Karain, at that moment, wondered if this was definitely the Nadia she had known all her life. She even got goosebumps. The girl felt as if her sister was a different person. Suddenly people ran up to them. Someone pointed in their direction and said that there was a person in the water. The second person saw this and shouted for someone to bring something to cover her. The man then walked over to Karain and covered her with his coat, asking if she was okay. Suddenly the Duke came in. He turned to his daughters and asked what they were making such a fuss about in the middle of the night. Karain saw him and immediately jumped up and ran into his arms. Her father asked how she got so wet. Karain pointed at her sister and said that was how the dirty girl had pushed her into the pond, and thought to herself that she wouldn't let it go so easily, and her sister would be the end of her. The Duke immediately asked his daughter if it was true. Karain at this moment thought that she had all the proof. Therefore, there was no way she would be able to justify herself. But at that moment, it was Nadia who spoke. She turned to her sister and said that despite all her hatred, how could you lie like that? She didn't listen to her, went to the edge anyway, and she said it was dangerous. Nadia said she was only trying to get her out of there. Then the girl asked if she was afraid of people thinking badly of her, but her lies would dishonor their whole family. Karain immediately got angry and started yelling, asking her how it was she was lying. Yes, it was her sister, telling untruths. She threatened her with her mother's necklace, and eventually the girl pushed her into the lake. Suddenly the girl heard the whispers of the people who had gathered around. Oh my God, did she just threaten her? At that moment, Karain realized that she had said something unnecessary. People continued to whisper. She was decorating with a necklace, so it means a younger daughter has a bad character. By the way, Why is the heirloom of the first daughter's mother's heirloom in the second daughter's possession? Was she really more loved in Hertz than Nadia? The people continued to whisper, and Karain said in an uncertain voice that none of this was true. But then suddenly her father came up to her and told her to be quiet, putting his hand on her shoulder. Karain is very cold, so let her go back to her room and get some rest so she doesn't catch a cold. He thought that if he left it alone, there would be rumors among the servants, and very unpleasant ones at that. Karain took her father's hand and said that it wasn't fair. Let her explain everything. The Duke asked what it was she was doing. He then turned to one of the servants and ordered him to take Karain to his room as soon as possible. He then turned to those present and said that apparently there had been a little quarrel between the sisters, and he was sorry that it had happened on such a bright day. Those present also said that the noble daughter of Balasite had dishonored the family so much. She will have to be very quiet for a while. In the end, her father did not side with Karain, contrary to what Nadia expected. So she turned to the Duke and said that she didn't even know that her honor was important to him, even though she had lived with him for 20 years. But in fact the girl didn't care about absolutely everything, because she had returned her mother's necklace, and now she could leave the manor in peace. The next morning in the forest near the lands of Winterfell, several knights rode, saddling their horses. Then suddenly a guy named Fabian ran up close to Glenn and addressed him. The Marquis himself said he was too noisy, so let him go back to his seat. Fabian answered him not to be like that. He would just ask something and go back to his place. He moved even closer to him and said he wanted to ask just in case it was really a figurative question. After that, Fabian asked the master in a whisper, "Wasn't Madame's confession sincere?" Glenn was shocked when he heard it. He immediately stopped his horse and said that if Fabian was going to keep talking such nonsense, let him go his way. Fabian replied that he too knew the girl was deceiving him. But looking at her face during the ceremony, it seemed to him that she was quite sincere in her words, and he wasn't so sure she was playing to the public. Glenn, after pondering his words, told him not to trust her appearance. She is, after all, the Duke's daughter. The girl could stab him in the back at any moment. Let him just look at her betrayed. Is it really to help his family in times of need, or does she only plan to keep an eye on them? Thinking about all of this, he said that it seemed like he was right. Glenn told him that if he understood everything, then let him go back to his seat. Isn't he her guardian? Let him be careful if the girl gets in trouble. It would become a headache. He said okay, and galloped off. As he rode, he wondered if he would be there for her after what he had heard. That worried him even more. At that moment, Nadia, seeing him from the window, said that he was already here, and she just wanted to talk to him. But he was missing, so she had to wait. Fabian was very surprised to see her. The guy replied that he just had a little business to attend to and wondered. Had she not heard their conversation? Nadia said that makes sense then, and also that some say he was assigned as her guardian. So what's his name? The boy got embarrassed and said his name was Fabian Knox. Nadia, when she heard this, said that he had a very nice name, and Fabian thanked her. After that he began to squeeze the horse's reins hard. The girl, when she noticed this, said that, as she thought, he was uncomfortable with her. At this point he thought he was being too obvious after all. But Nadia replied that she understood. After all, everyone knows that the Balasite and Winterfell families are enemies. But he would soon realize that her feelings for the Marquis were real. At that moment, Fabian remembered Glenn's words to him not to believe her deceptive appearance. But he immediately dispelled those memories and told the girl that not at all. He was just very shy, that's all. Afterward he said it was her first time in the north after all. And if she wanted, he could tell her about the north while they were on the road. Nadia thanked Fabian and said that she was just so bored that she didn't mind hearing his story. And she thought to herself, it was such a relief. Apparently she had managed to break through the younger knight's barriers after all. Sometime down the road, after Fabian's story, Nadia fell a little asleep. Then suddenly a guy knocked on the window, waking her up, and told her to go outside for a bit because it was already Winterfell Mansion. Nadia knew that preparations for the wedding ceremony had been rushed, but she had not at all expected what awaited her at the mansion. When she tried on her wedding dress, the maids told her that Glenn's mother had brought it with her, and it wasn't long before the wedding, so it was decided to choose it. One of the maids said that she might have heard before, but there's an influx of monsters in the north right now, and it's the bad harvest season, so people aren't in a good position. Because of this, a modest wedding ceremony is being planned. Of course, a wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event, but at that moment, Nadia interrupted the maid and said that everything was fine, and she understood everything. The maid was very surprised to hear this, but the girl said that as long as she was there for Glenn, it didn't matter what size the wedding was. Nadia said that besides, she is now the Marquis, so she should also think of her people. But then suddenly another girl came into the room and said that if Nadia felt that way, then she could be perfectly at ease, and the girl hoped that Nadia would always think so. Nadia, when she turned around, saw Mrs. Grace ground in front of her. She is Glenn's aunt. The previous Marquesa has already died, and the previous Marquis is bedridden, so now Grace is the eldest mistress in the family. Grace said that this dress fit her perfectly, and when Glenn sees it, he'll go crazy over how beautiful it is. Nadia smiled and thanked Mistress, saying that she would be very happy about it. Grace moved closer to the girl and told her that because of her father, Glenn is even rude to her, but she told the girl not to worry. She's so beautiful. So in time, Glenn will open her heart. Grace told her not to worry about anything because she will help Nadia. Let the girl focus only on opening his soul. Nadia, of course, knows what Mistress wanted to tell her with those words. She knows that Glenn still didn't acknowledge Nadia. Then she replied that it was good, and she would remember everything. After that, she smiled. Grace then said she had to go, but then before she went out, she remembered and asked the girl if she knew what the most important thing in seduction was, so she should prepare herself well. Nadia was shocked because she thought of her first wedding night. In fact, the girl thought Glenn wouldn't want to touch her, so she refused to spend the night together. Nadia wondered, what if this man offered to stay together for the whole night? And after that conversation, Nadia started thinking about it all the time, about the fact that they would have to sleep together, and even when there was a bride's exit, she thought about it. The thought never left her mind, even when the priest asked the bride and groom to say their vows. She thought they would sleep in the same room immediately after the wedding ceremony. When the priest asked the groom Glenn if he would take Nadia Balasite as his wife and swear to love her forever, the man said he would. Nadia, on the other hand, was at this moment wondering if Marquis would want to stay in the same bed with her. And when the priest asked the bride Nadia if she would take Glenn Winterfell as her husband, the girl thought about how much he hated her. Nadia doesn't know what she'll do if he really wants to do this. She certainly didn't expect that to happen. Suddenly the priest coughed and asked the bride if she would take him. Nadia, distracted from her thoughts, replied that yes, of course. Then the priest said that they should seal their vow with a kiss. When Nadia heard this, she was very surprised. She had been thinking only of how they would share the room, and the kiss had slipped her mind. Nadia thought it was okay. He'd probably pretend they were kissing. What kind of cohabitation could they be talking about? But at that moment, Glenn touched his warm lips to hers, sealing his vow with a kiss. Nadia was surprised. When it was over, she was in a stupor. But at that moment, the priest said she was pronouncing them husband and wife. All Nadia could think about was that Glenn had really kissed her. And when night came, the girl was out of her mind with excitement. In her room, she did not know what to do or how to be. Nadia got even more anxious when she looked at her watch, because she realized she was running out of time, and he would be here soon. She didn't know if they were really going to sleep together. He had really kissed her at the ceremony. But at that moment, without even knocking on her room, Glenn walked in. Nadia was shocked. He had really come. Then she said she had been waiting for him, but she didn't know what to do, how to be. She couldn't run away anymore. But her musings were interrupted by Glenn's voice. He told her not to forget, because there was no way he was contacting the Duke of Balasit's daughter. Glenn leaned over and said that he was only here to tell her in person. That was the end of it. Turning around, he started to leave, but then Nadia yelled for him to wait. But the door immediately slammed shut after that. As he left, the maids heard Nadia crying. She was crying and screaming that her feelings were genuine. So why is he so cruel? In fact, the girl sat under the door and only pretended to cry. It was such a relief for her when he left. After that, she got up and walked towards the bed, thinking, here's wishing he'd never change his mind about this. As she passed the table, she looked at the champagne that was on ice, and thought that she hadn't even had a proper meal today, had she? So she ate whatever the maids had prepared for both of them. After that, she went to bed. The girl felt very well. Trying to sleep, Nadia thought she had nothing more to worry about. The bed was so soft, so she thought she was about to fall asleep, and she did. The next morning, the maids in their study were talking. One of them asked her friend if she had heard about what had happened yesterday. The master immediately left her room without even staying there for 5 minutes. He was very angry. The other maid said that she had bet that he would not go to her at all. Then the other asked, "What happened after that?" The girl with the pink hair suggested that, something most likely, they had a fight. So he got angry. She must be very embarrassed right now. The maid who stood under Nadia's door yesterday said it wasn't like that. She heard the girl crying for a long time. Her friend didn't believe her. She said it couldn't be like that. But she replied that according to Aiden, she was the mistress's maid. She looked like an unrequited girl in love who had been rejected. The girl with pink hair said that she thought Nadia would act arrogant, but still the master couldn't do otherwise. By then, they had already left their laundry room and were heading down the hall. Their conversation was overheard by the knights. Then one of them turned to Glenn and said that the maids must be taught to keep their mouths shut. Fabian agreed with his partner and said that it should be done by any means necessary. But Glenn says they don't have to do that. Let them just turn a blind eye to it and whether they really think the maids will love her anymore. After that they went and Glenn asked what the girl was doing now. Knight said what her options were. She has officially become a marquess, so she has to look after the household. Glenn, hearing this, turned to him and said, "Is he really saying that she has fully started spying on them?" When he turned to Fabian and said he was her guardian, the boy was surprised and asked, "You mean he means for him to keep an eye on Nadia?" Glenn replied that was exactly what he meant. Let him watch to see if she does anything suspicious, if she sends letters to her parents' homes. Have Fabian stay by her side and report everything to Glenn. Fabian then went to the girl and explained the situation to her. Nadia, when he had finished his story, asked, "So Glenn sent him to guard her?" Fabian smiled and said that was correct. He would take care of Mistress from this day forward. At that moment, Nadia thought, did he get angry because she was watching him? Then she said she was very glad that Glenn cared for her so much. He thought she would be uncomfortable with a stranger, so he sent Fabian. The boy got a little embarrassed and said that was it. He thought that he had come to watch her, not to guard her. The girl was so happy that he felt ashamed. Fabian then said he would wait at the door. She could go about her business in peace. Nadia said okay. She didn't mind. And at that moment, she thought that apparently Glenn had decided to watch her all day long, using Fabian in the process. So she'd have to convince him somehow that she wasn't a spy. Afterward, Nadia asked Gordon, the butler, to bring her the housekeeping book. A few minutes later, the butler brought her a book. The girl sat down at the table and began to study it. Afterward, she turned to Gordon and asked why they had so much debt. She knew in her past life that the environment at Winterfell wasn't the best, but she had no idea that the sum would be so large. Gordon told her that it was the nature of the North. Every few years they are attacked by a wave of monsters. Their land is very depleted, so there are no resources, and no landmarks either. Then Nadia asked, "Don't they get rewards from the king for slaying monsters every year? What do all these funds go to?" Gordon said that thanks to this money they were able to reach today. Nadia said that in addition, the Marquis had recently taken part in the Kalia expedition, so they were no longer allowed to participate in expeditions, and the girl didn't even know that war required so much expense. Gordon replied that they did not want to take part in it. In an angry voice he said, "What? Who demanded that they do their duty?" But then, realizing what he was talking about, immediately fell silent. Nadia told him that by that someone, he was referring to her father after all. The butler immediately began to apologize and said his words were just nonsense, but Nadia wasn't listening to him anymore. She thought she would make a plan to earn the money anyway, but she didn't think the amount she owed would be that much. She wondered how the Marquis of Winterfell had paid off his debts in his past life. But then suddenly her musings were interrupted by Gordon, who said he had a good solution. When Nadia asked why, he said that she was now part of the Winterfell family too. "Well then, did he ask us to?" Will she called to say bluntly without waiting for an answer, continued, "Such difficult times for her new family. He asked if she uses the dowry to pay off her debts. Won't she help with that?" And Nadia thought, why did he give her the seal and the key to the warehouse so easily? So he wants to test her by asking her to solve her financial problems. However, the girl replied that it could not be done. Gordon said to let the lady think about it again, but the girl replied that she wasn't saying that because she didn't want to help out in the family. Let him think it over for himself. Looking at the expenditure book, one can see that every year the debt is slowly increasing. Earlier he said that the reason is a peculiarity of the North, so her dowry will not solve this issue in the long run. Yes, and it will help this year, and next year it won't, and in the end the debt will still grow.